Thank you, Will, for that overly kind introduction. And my thanks to the congressman for taking time out of their busy schedules and be here with us, and everyone else who contributed, especially Jordan Flowers. I just returned from South America for about 4 weeks, and promised I would not work on anything related to UAP the whole time. And got back here and made a quick turn. Under the weather, wouldn't have a briefing if it wasn't for Jordan and his assistance. What I want to talk about is I don't think the public is aware of the extent of our airspace vulnerabilities and failures and the degree to which they've already been exploited and are being exploited today, and the challenge that we face in trying to sort this out. I also want to pivot a little bit based on earlier conversations. I wasn't going to get into this so much, but Dr. Lowe talked about spending $1 billion or so to develop new sensors to collect information. One of my career frustrations in the intelligence community has been that we have incredible sensors that are far more than $1 billion. And we have a great many of them. And they are collecting information today, which is directly pertinent to this topic. But that information is not reaching Congress. It's not reaching the scientific community. In many cases, I don't think it's reaching ARROW, which is the office that Congress established to study and evaluate this phenomenon. So if we could have the first slide, please. Versus, you would be right for me. Yeah, so here's just a little overview of topics I'm going to touch on, which is the word shocking, I think, is not an exaggeration or hyperbole in this case. We really are effectively naked from an air defense standpoint when it comes to these drones. I'll talk and provide very specific examples to illustrate that, and the UAP. Let me begin here. Okay, this is unfortunately I don't have this right in front of me, but this is a map that displays roughly the coverage provided by something called the solid state phased array radar system. These are reportedly the most powerful emitters on the planet. If there are other civilizations in nearby solar systems, they're more likely to detect these emitters than probably anything else on our planet. How many UAP would you guess they have detected in, say, the last 20 years that have been reported to ARROW? Zero. How is it possible the most powerful radar, I've been writing about this for years, by the way, fecklessly. This is not a new point. I've been trying to get Congress, to somebody in Congress to listen to this and pay attention for years. Kirk will testify to that in the Armed Services Committee, because I keep going up there and had them for years say, guys, how come this thing never detects any UAP? How is that possible? These are the most powerful emitters on the planet. And look at the area they cover. And oh, by the way, when you look at the area they cover, we keep having reports over and over again from tactical systems, from ships, plane, and aircraft in the areas covered by this radar. So Aegis ships, planes flown by Mr. Ryan here and his naval aviator colleagues and others are reporting UAP constantly in these areas, but somehow these systems never seem to see a UAP ever. How is that possible? And how come nobody's asking about that? Is this a Chinese balloon situation where all we need to do is tweak the filters? And lo and behold, we're going to bring into focus something which is, drones, if nothing else, they're a vital, absolutely vital air security significance. We know that in Russia and Ukraine today, drones are causing more casualties and killing more people than any other weapon system, right? So this is utterly transformed warfare as we know it. Here's a multi-billion-dollar system. It's up and running. This is the successor to the old ballistic missile early warning system. So its primary function is to detect ballistic missiles coming over the poles from Russia or China or from North Korea and to develop intercept solutions. But it also has a mission of detecting sea launch cruise missiles and bombers and so forth. So there's one of several possibilities. Either we've spent billions of dollars on a system that's not performing as it should be, or it just, maybe needs some tweaks in the filters to expand the range of things it reports on. One of the challenges with these systems is to avoid clutter, right? Because they're so powerful, they collect so much. They've got to filter it down so what's being displayed is reasonable and appropriate to the mission. It could be a problem of that sort. Or it's simply so highly classified that the information is not reaching error. I favor the latter. I think that's what's going on. And I think if Congress were to poke hard on this, maybe get an inspector general to look at these possible options, or otherwise look into this, they would get some answers.
Quick question. Is that data from that system being mined?
I believe so. I don't know how far back they go and how that's a great question. I don't know how far back it goes. And one of the things, so when you approach NORAD about this with the Air Force, and you start asking about this data, and what are they seeing? So right now, my understanding is, by the way, that they don't even tell Aero, whose director supposedly appeared for everything, they don't even tell him when they scramble fighter aircraft to conduct intercepts. So they're regularly scrambling fighter aircraft. I've talked to and interviewed on television a NORAD officer who told an account of walking into Cheyenne Mountain where he, for duty, and everybody was standing on their feet looking at the big screen. And there was a UAP coming down from the Arctic along the east coast of the United States. And the commander-in-chief of NORAD said, quote, "I want that thing." And everybody said, "Yes, sir." And they were launching everything we had on the east coast. Couldn't get it near it, couldn't get a radar lock. It disappeared out over the southern Atlantic. Is that the only time that ever happened? The one time that this NORAD officer gave this account from the 1990s, when the system was much less capable than it is today, and we were seeing fewer things than we are today, and fewer intrusions over restricted airspace, I rather doubt it. This is, by the way, only one of the number of multi-billion-dollar systems that are already deployed. They're collecting data that bears directly on this topic and don't seem to be reporting anything to Aero. So Aero issued a report. In their last report, they said, we don't have anything in space, in any UAP in space, but there were, I think, 40 instances in which ground-based reporters, like civilian airline pilots, reported things far above beyond what they call the Kármán line in the 100,000 feet, which is what they consider outer space for these purposes. Now, there's another system called the ground-based electro-optical deep space surveillance system, which is a ring of cameras circling the globe. It does nothing but stare at the night sky all night long. How come those systems didn't detect what these pilots are talking about? They're looking up saying, I saw these bright lights moving, et cetera, et cetera. Well, there's one of these cameras on top of one of our highest peaks in Hawaii, and it does nothing but stare at the night sky. That same night sky all night long. Did it miss that? Was it a cloudy night? Have any of those cameras ever collected one of these incidents? They said there were 40. I would think somebody ought to take an inventory and say, we want to know which of these surveillance systems is reporting UAP and which are not. And what specifically are they reporting? Take an inventory. Again, is there a systemic problem and failure with these systems? The taxpayers spending billions of dollars, I would think we would want to know that. Now, interestingly, with regard to the GI system, I on one occasion had a colleague who was visiting for a sort of routine oversight purpose many years ago. And I said, while you're there, Pete, why don't you ask them if they ever seen anything strange? I didn't want to say flying saucer, but that's what I was alluding to. And he knew what I was talking about. So he asked the question, and sure enough, this the month before, on that one occasion when the question was asked, they had indeed collected photographic imagery of what was 4 or 5 objects moving through the night sky in formation, traveling parallel to the Earth's surface. I don't know that the question has ever been asked since. That was probably 20 years ago. I find it hard to believe that in all that time that they haven't collected anything relevant to this question. And I don't understand why that data is not getting error. I don't know if anyone has even gotten a checklist to make sure that when Congress issued this directive and said, there's a reporting requirement now, everybody needs to report this stuff, it needs to go to the Air Force, it needs to filter down through the commands. Is anything coming back up from these systems? Do these people even know they're supposed to report? And is there any reporting of that kind going on? There's another system called the Space-Based Infrared System. Multi-billion-dollar system. This is again in the unclassified domain, what I'm talking about here. There's quite a bit, additionally that is paid for by the taxpayer that's pertinent. It's a very robust system with satellites in multiple orbits, highly elliptical orbits, geospatial orbits, very high precision. It's looking for infrared and heat kinds of events. As far as I know, they have detected, reported to Arrow 0 UAP incidents. Okay, maybe nothing happened. Maybe they haven't seen anything, but it does make me wonder. In this case, it's particularly strange since we know there are dozens, if not hundreds, of UAP incidents happening within the areas that this system is supposed to be providing coverage of. For example, the famous Nimitz incident occurred, almost directly in front of the radar at Beale Air Force Base, right off the coast. And this went on for about a week or so. And you had objects descending from 60,000 feet and back up. So I don't think anyone could say, well, they were so small and they were so close to the water, it wasn't within range of the radar. These things were at very high altitudes. And this was going on a sustained basis. So my suspicion is, now I understand that that data could be highly classified. I could understand why it might not be the public domain. What I can't understand is why Arrow does not seem to be aware of this data that exists, and why the appropriate congressional committees do not seem to be aware of and informed of this. Do I realistically expect anything to happen because I'm raising this here? No, because I've been doing this for years. But what the heck? We're here. Might as well try again. Let's go on to the next slide. So we have an incredible series of events that have been happening. I wrote an article a year ago to this month called "Who's Operating the Drones Plaguing the U.S. Military?" And it did actually get read by a producer for 60 Minutes, who subsequently did a piece which featured several four-star officers who in fact confirmed what I was discussing and alleging in the article, with regard to the events that occurred at Langley Air Force Base and elsewhere. It is truly documented. Here's the Air Combat Command, which is supposed to be protecting these gentlemen in this institution where we're sitting in Capitol Hill, in the White House, in the U.S. government, and they can't protect their own airspace. They have to move our cutting edge F-22 fighter squadron to a Navy base from an Air Force base. And this is going on for, I forget how long it was, a couple of weeks roughly. And we're talking about strange craft, bright lights appearing over this base, making it unsafe to fly night after night after night. And to this day, we have no idea where they were coming from. We don't know their capabilities. We don't know who was controlling them. And that remains true, not just for that base and that incident, but for numerous other bases. So the first incident, and the war zone is a great source for people interested in this topic, by the way, terrific reporting. 2018 in Guam, we've installed a $1.5 billion anti-ballistic missile system. And these brightly lit small craft show up, they go right to the THAAD missile battery, and they're shining bright lights down on it like the photograph. And this happens 2 nights in a row. So back in 2018, it wasn't as apparent as it is now, but obviously those drones could have been weaponized. They could have easily taken that battery out and eviscerated the ballistic missile defense on our leading facility in the Pacific. Not to mention the fact, I just went to that to Google Maps this morning to check that air base, and that air base, like Langley and like some of the others, has very few hardened shelters. So those multi-$100 million aircraft that are on the runway could easily be destroyed by drones that are costing, what, a few $1,000? Okay, that's how vulnerable we are. Then in 2019, we began to see this activity off the coast of the United States in California. And I'll read a little excerpt from one of those reports. USS Paul Hamilton observed full UAS with a closest point of approach approximately 200 yards off the bow, port and starboard beams. They had a on-time station of approximately 2 hours and 20 minutes. So if you have children and you have drones at home, you know that they usually have a maximum time of about 20 minutes. Okay, these were on station for 2 hours and 20 minutes, 60, 80 miles off the shore, not apparent where they could have been launched from and what their total dwell time was. The anti-UAS systems on the ship were ineffective in bringing them down. The first UAS spotted by lookouts at 2:40, observed with a single white light. They go on to report others within 500 yards, maneuvering fore and aft with 4 white lights and a flashing red light. They're not trained to be sly. They're not trained to be clandestine. Approximately 200 yards above the ship, again, maneuvering right around the ship, back and forth, up and down. They went to the bridge of the ship with a powerful searchlight or photographic device. So they're actually, we've had cases where they go right up to the bridge of the ship and shine a bright light in on the captain and the senior crew. That's how overt and provocative this is, and that apparently reflects their degree of confidence that we can't intercept them and bring them down, whoever it is that's operating. That same year, we began to see them around nuclear power plants. In 2020, very strange situation out west. This went on not just for weeks, this went on for months. In one of the least densely populated. There's a slide that kind of shows, I think maybe it's back, roughly the part of the region we're talking about here. Yeah, eastern Colorado and western Oklahoma. So we're talking about farmland. I drove out west of Ghost Key last winter and drove kind of through the area. It is incredibly sparsely populated. There's very, very, very little there. And yet these drones were operating in groups, clusters, as many as 40 drones at a time. They formed this was so expensive and there was so much eventual furor raised among the ranchers and farmers that they formed a task force involving the FBI, Department of Homeland Security, local law enforcement. They deployed a special plane that the governor of California authorized that had sensors on it. And this continued to occur, and we never found out where these things were coming from, who was operating them. I called a sheriff there and spoke to him about it, and he told me a fascinating story. He said he was actually the deputy sheriff, but the sheriff was also a witness. They responded to a call, and there were a group of these lights over this farm, and a brighter light came in, a larger light, and the smaller lights went inside of it. And it took off at an extreme velocity and passed almost directly over the sheriff and the deputy. And he told me, I've never seen anything move that fast. He's also in the military reserves, this individual. So, and that report, by the way, he called it a mothership. It's not just a story that I happen to hear. If you look at the documentation from Air Force Office of Special Investigation, the FBI, and so forth, you'll see written documentation from other witnesses that refers to a mothership. So this is actually well documented, very strange and very concerning. We don't know what is operating in our airspace, and this continues, often in militarily sensitive areas. 2023, Arizona test ranges. You've heard about Langley, but we do a lot of flying in the Southwest. Flying conditions are great. It's a terrific place for the Air Force. We have large Air Force bases there. And some of the strange things we're seeing in the number and the rate and frequency with which this is happening is extraordinary. So this includes, now if your average drone is restricted to a flight of 450 feet, we've got F-35s and F-22s, well in this case F-35s, they're encountering drones at 15,000 feet, 17,000 feet, 35,000 feet, going 500 miles per hour in restricted military airspace. Meanwhile, in an adjacent area, and I included in my PowerPoint briefing, you can find videos from the Department of Homeland Security, 9 of them, about some of the strange things that they're seeing on the border. Very, very odd things. Now, this raises a little bit of an issue that I've written about recently also, with the hope that it might prove some assistance to this task force, which is, why isn't the Department of Homeland Security can publish all these videos, but Aero can't and DOD can't? There was a hearing before Congress years ago with Mr. Bray from the Navy, and he said, I assure you, I'm going to review these videos and make sure that we get out to you and the public everything we can. I think maybe there's been one video in 3 years since then. When I've looked into this and talked to people at different parts of the federal government and Aero and so forth, they basically said nobody feels it's their job to turn this over to the public. Nobody wants to make the effort to submit it for public release. So back in 2017, I provided 3 unclassified videos to the New York Times. You've all seen those, Gimbal, FLIR, GoFast, right? there are a lot more like that. They just haven't been released because shortly after that, somebody created a classification guide which suddenly said, in contradiction to the executive order on classification signed by the president, that anything, essentially anything having to do with UAP is now suddenly mystically classified because it might damage national security. Even though those three videos, the FBI, the Office of Special Investigations, the Air Force investigated, confirmed they were classified. Not only did they not damage national security, they helped national security. They helped raise an awareness for the public and for Congress that we have an air defense problem here. And the scientific community is very eager to get more of those kinds of videos because they want to train AI systems. They want to know what it is we're looking for. They want to measure the signatures. There's a lot they can contribute to this, but the bureaucracy is not responding. And I think I couldn't put a number on it, but I believe that if someone were to poke that system and force them to review that classification guide, if someone were to establish some advocacy for taking that which is truly unclassified, and admittedly, absolutely, there are many things, videos that are appropriately classified, not questioning that. What I am saying is that there are others that fall into this camp that would have value to the public, value to Congress, value to the scientific community, and this is not an expensive proposition. It's just a matter of getting somebody to focus on it and put these through the process. And I think the public not only has a right to know, I think it's beyond that. I think there's a utilitarian function. There's great value in the public knowing this information, and value to the scientific community in having this information. I give the example sometimes of what happened was, and I promise I'm going to get off the stage like real fast. So I'm starting to fall into my own stuff here that I get into, but the Sputnik program, I have no doubt if they could have kept it secret, the CIA would not have told the American people the Russians had a satellite in orbit. And we wouldn't have had the space program when we did. We wouldn't have gotten to the moon when we did. Because the people would have gotten fired up and said, oh my God, this is not acceptable what the Russians are ahead of us, and we need to act. And Congress took action. And it was, it actually, ironically, we ended up collaborating with the Russians in space, and it actually helped facilitate some peaceful developments and relations. I think there are a lot of benefits along those lines that they could accrue, but it's going to take some effort and on the part of Congress, I think, to compel this to happen if it's going to happen. So with that, I will close and thank our congressional sponsors for taking an interest in this and giving us the opportunity to express our concerns and share what we've learned thus far about this problem. Thank you.
Second question. This high resolution 4K videos of UAP, is this stuff that you know about, or is this stuff that you've seen?
Well, there's some stuff that I've seen and I've asked about it, and I think there is one video I've seen that they're going to declassify. And I hope that happens. It wasn't I wish it was 4K. It was more like what you've seen, was infrared sensor, gun camera video along the lines of what the New York Times published and the Washington Post subsequently. So it's that kind of video from that sensor system.
So we know it exists. It's there.
Yeah. And now, by the way, we're at a point now where the Arrow has received somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,800 military reports. 1,800 in just the last few years. Some of those are iPhone videos, so I don't think there's a big sources of methods issue there. There's a variety of, some are from, stuff you get at Best Buy from sailors on the ship with a video camera like that. There's gotta be a number in that mix that could be revealed. And beyond that, as I said, I think there's a lot of high caliber sensor data. The American people have already paid for many of these sensors. They're out there, many of them, and they're collecting pertinent data. Dr. Loeb has benefited from the data that had to do with the reentry of the interstellar vehicle. There was a great example of a taxpayer-funded system that contributed to science in a very meaningful way. I'm here to tell you, I think there's a lot more of that kind of thing that could be made available if someone did a thorough assessment of the sensor systems that we have and what they're collecting, and took a hard look at the classification issues. We also had a system, precedent ones, where we cleared for global warming some scientists to look at some classified data related to that scientific problem set, and that's conceivably another, there's problems with that because scientists want to be able to publish, of course. They want their colleagues to be able to see everything possible about the sources, but there are a variety of opportunities I think we're missing. At the same time, there's a huge national security issue here. We've got stuff in our skies, some of it could represent technological surprise that we need to find out about. You've got these unmanned systems at 35,000 feet. That's a mile higher than the top of Mount Everest, going 500 miles an hour in restricted military airspace. I would say we've got a lot of work to do. I'd be prepared to contribute what I could to that question as well, but the classified session was canceled. I think due to the sensitivity of the names of the individuals and so forth. I didn't think it was appropriate to do it, I could do it in an unclassified setting. If they do reschedule a classified setting, I think I'm more than happy to try to provide some specifics. I published a signal message I received from a very senior government official. He described a specific Secretary of the Air Force memorandum. He described a specific recovery site. He named the Air Force gatekeeper for the program. Nobody from Congress has asked me to follow up on that. I have all that information. I was prepared to share what I could about that, but I don't know that it would be definitive or any conclusion, but I do think those names, due to the privacy concerns of the individuals and so forth, obviously it's pretty sensitive. So I'm prepared to try to help with that as I can as well. But in this session, I wanted to address some of those other issues related to classification.
Keeping national security and secrets classified, which I completely agree with. There are very specific reasons why we want to keep certain aspects of this topic classified, sources and methods, etc. Maybe certain capabilities. But let me ask this is a question probably for you, Mr. Mellon. In your opinion, what are the
Mellon.
I'm trying
When did I become Mr. Mellon?
well, because the fact I'm not wearing a tie, I have to make up for it somewhere. I've already been accused of being too casual and too lax, so I'm trying to be more formal here. Chris, in your opinion, what are the consequences of retroactively classifying information previously unclassified, and are you aware of any specific incidents of information or data that was once unclassified that is now classified?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, Lou, I think there's piles of that stuff. And I think there's so much of it, it's kind of hard to gauge what the consequences are. Because my understanding is that they adopted the classification guide that basically says anything and everything to do with UAP is classified hereforth. Now, people who haven't read the executive order may not be aware. The executive order says when in doubt, you should err on the side of going unclassified. You're supposed to err on the side of transparency and openness to the American people. And when we're talking about many of these videos, if an F-18 FLIR targeting pod video was unclassified in 2017, and we're not talking about denied area or some other unusual exception, how can it be classified 2 years when you take the same video from the same system in the same area 2 years later? I don't get it. But that looks like what they did. And boy, it's just typical. I argued vociferously against it at the time. I knew some of the people involved and tried to make the argument to that guys, you wouldn't even be here. We wouldn't be having a discussion if information hadn't gotten into the public domain via Congress and the press. And that's why we made the progress we made today. And now you want to drop a curtain on everything? I don't get it. So I can't really gauge the implications, but I do think they're negative. I think it's inappropriate. I think it's probably unlawful. Our panel's coming to an end, and I did want to share a concern I have, which is that we have two different issues here. We have UAP objects that we're observing in flight, active around military facilities that we have an issue of possible recovery of materials. These two issues in the public mind it's entirely possible that we might not have recovered materials, but UAP are very real. And here addressing and it's an urgent issue. And I have a concern that if that issue is not in some way validated or addressed, it runs the risk of discrediting the entire topic. And we've made enormous progress. Nothing happened essentially from the Blue Book days until 2017. And I fear that if there isn't some effective way of addressing this, that we run the risk of major setback. I don't know how secure it is in the long term. I'm not seeing interest on the part of the chairman of the committees that fund it, on the armed services and intelligence committees. They don't seem to be engaged or supportive at this point for defense and probes. So I think we're in somewhat tenuous ground. Kirkman is probably in a better position to address this than me, but I think that the second thing that involves management worry component and how do you manage that, who deals with that. It's such a transformational issue that it cannot be a press release that comes out from from Congress some afternoon, Friday afternoon or something. It's a literally cosmic issue that runs the risk of having terrifying tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people. So it's a very complex, interrelated set of issues. And I think we and whoever in Congress is providing oversight of this really needs to think through how to handle the two of those things. And, our foundation obviously wants to help if we can. But I think it's a tough challenge for members who are very, very busy people with a lot on their plates and a complex one.